Today, I'm going to help you pick your ideal OOTP 23 save, which team is best for you. And I'm going to go just by picking what I think is the most fun, with the asterisk that you may find really crazy difficult saves to be more fun, which then you just flip the list upside down and there you go. But we're going to create a tier list today based off of the roster talent, the farm system talent, budget, ownership, all the fun stuff that goes into what I think makes a bit more of an enjoyable save. So I'm going to do a tier list here and just go alphabetically. So feel free to skip to the end if you just want the rankings. But I'm going to talk about why each team gets that particular ranking based off of, just like I said, all the in-game stuff. So real life factors about like actual record that would influence things like a live start, I'm not including there. This is just going to be straight from the standard game start. So going from there, we're going to start with Arizona. And we actually start off very rough because I have them as an F. There's not a lot of talent at the major league level. Sorry, all the Diamondbacks fans. But really, there's just not a lot in the game. Like, Ketel Marte is awesome. But you start losing steam fast after him. There's some intriguing prospects in the farm system in the outfield, Corbin Carroll, Alec Thomas, guys like that. But the team has a bottom third budget. The farm system overall is mid-tier in game, and it arguably could be bottom third. So because of that, I have them as one of the worst teams to start a save with. Like I said, if you are a masochist, they're actually a great team because it's a tough division and you don't have a lot to start off with. So Arizona, we got off to a rough start. Sorry. Atlanta. So I have Atlanta as a B. So on the plus side, they have two of the best contracts in the game with Ronald Acuna Jr., Ozzie Albies. They have just a lot of talent spread throughout the rest of the lineup, especially after getting Matt Olson and getting him locked into a very reasonable deal, and he's still in the prime of his career. The pitching staff also pretty well balanced. The only thing that stops them from getting a solid A for me is that their farm system isn't very good, which I mean is what you expect with a team that just won a World Series recently and is really very competitive right now. So that's the only thing stopping that. But they would be a very fun one to start with. Next on the list, Baltimore. So I have them as a C. You have Adley Rushman, which is amazing. You get the best catcher prospect in the game for the next 6 years. The farm system as a whole actually has some good upside to it. A lot of talent, multiple positions, pitching and hitting too. The downside is they have the next to lowest budget, so 29th out of 30 teams, and the lowest payroll to start with. So you don't have a lot of wiggle room to start. However, does make them perfect for a ground up rebuild, because you're actually coming in a couple of years into their real life rebuild with restocked farm system, and they've shed a lot of the bad contracts. So it's perfect for that, but it would be a challenging save to start with, especially in the deep AL East. And speaking of the AL East, Boston. So I have Boston as a B, and I honestly thought they might be a little bit lower personally before I looked at the team, but they're solidly above average across the board. The hitters are good. The pitchers, they could use a little bit of help, just like real life. The farm system's good. It's not awesome. There's not like a ton of top quality franchise changing prospects in there initially, but there's a couple that could be there, and definitely a lot of depth to help build out the team. The contracts are surprisingly sane, which is kind kind of surprising given Boston's history in free agency. But there's really not a lot to knock against them. They're just not at the very top tier for me. So I'd say if you're starting out, just learning about baseball, just learning about OOTP, and you don't necessarily have a team, or your team is like Arizona or Pittsburgh, and you really don't want to start at the bottom of baseball, I think Boston would be a great start there, especially. They've got like Chris Sale coming back from injury, which makes the team a lot better about halfway through the season, unless he gets injured again, which you never know. Next is the Chicago Cubs. And I've played so many Chicago Cubs saves. They're my favorite NL team. But right now, I think they're actually a D. There's not a ton of talent in the major leagues, which once again, given where they were in the cycle, they've started on the rebuild, traded away a lot of their longtime players recently. So there's not a lot in the major leagues at the moment. You do get a pretty decent middle infield to start with from a prospect perspective with Nick Madrigal and Nico Horner. So you get up the middle, starts off really well. And then, of course, Seiya Suzuki, awesome, very talented, best player on the team by far in OOTP. But the farm system's pretty weak. There's some toolsy guys who need a lot of help to get good. So you've got a lot of work to do with the farm system still. So you'd be really jumping into a rebuild, but at an earlier stage than someone like Baltimore, because really you're only about 1 year into it. So the other thing is that the Cubs ownership in the game can make things problematic. It's set to pretty demanding. So there's a higher likelihood that you'll be asked to have a winning record whenever you really should be rebuilding. So that's assuming you leave owner goals on. But because of that, it pains me to put the Cubs at a D. Next up, the Southsiders. The White Sox are just in a much better position with a B. You have some major injuries to key players at the start of the season, but you get them back pretty quickly. Once you get past that storm, you get 8 years of Luis Robert, and he is just a monster in this year's game. Like, amazing fielding, great hitting, a fantastic contract for the team. So, of course, there's plenty of other talent in the team. Lots of it's still pretty young, so you're not, in a position where you're going to need to rebuild with, a bunch of, by trading away a bunch of late 20s, early 30s guys. So you're in a really good position. You're probably going to manage the games better than Tony La Russa will. So, you've got a really high chance of success there. The farm system, nothing really to write home about. Once again, it makes sense given where they are in their competitive cycle, but that is something to keep in mind, is you'll really need to be proactive about finding ways in the draft to fill up the farm system without having a lot of, while still trying to remain competitive. Next up, Cincinnati. I have them as a C. I think looking at this team, I think they'll probably actually do better in OOTP than real life, just because of all the dysfunction going on there. You've got amazing prospects with Jonathan India, Stevenson, Green. Luis Castillo as a veteran still offers a lot. And you can probably find a few more pieces to at least, flirt with 500, if not, compete in a fairly weak division. You've got some opportunity there, and if lightning strikes, you can actually win with them, which I wouldn't say is possible in real life. Ownership, definitely a problem. I think they're also, you get somewhat realistic ratings there if you use owner goals, so definitely something to consider, but could be a fun and interesting one. Cleveland. So I have Cleveland as a B. I actually just started a Cleveland save on Twitch last night, and I've really been enjoying it. You get a lot of low-key good players like Stephen Kwan, Miles Straw. There's really not a lot of holes on the roster aside from first base. So you just need to find a couple players to fill in some gaps. Either like bottom of the rotation or some depth. But you have two amazing stars with Shane Bieber and Jose Ramirez. There's no long-term contracts aside from Ramirez and I think Straw and Clace, but they're all very, very well, like they're very team favorable. There's not a lot of money locked up, which is good because it's Cleveland, so you don't have a lot of money. So that's a bit challenging, but I think they're a really good save and really hits a nice balance between difficulty and fun. Colorado, another team that I have spent a lot of sims playing in the past, and I think they're an F. They're a bad team. There's not a lot of talent in the major leagues. There's not a lot of talent in the farm system. The budget, it's mid-table. It's I think about 15th or so, but that's good because you don't have a lot of money committed long term besides Chris Bryant. The problem is you've got to rebuild 24 of the 26 roster spots or something crazy. There's just slight exaggeration, but you just have to really rebuild, and it's tough because the ownership usually has higher expectations. And there is the major asterisk, which is that you're playing in Coors Field, which is, in a good save, a lot of fun because it either allows you to build differently or forces you to adapt in certain ways. I've had a lot of fun with it in the past, but starting from rock bottom talent-wise, it's not going to be fun, especially dealing with a really offensive park like that. So, it really, really challenging save. So if you're a masochist, go for it. You'll love it. If you're wanting to just get started and you want, if they're not your hometown team, I would definitely not recommend them. Detroit. Detroit's an interesting one. I have them right in the middle at a C. The reason being they have some amazingly exciting prospects with Torkelson, Riley Green, Casey Mize. You've got some young talent in there. However, you have the worst contract in the game right now in Miguel Cabrera, and I don't think Javier Baez is far behind, especially if the OOTP aging curve is unkind to him. There's no budget money when you start, so you have to shed money to bring anybody in. It just ramps up the difficulty, and it's another team that theoretically, you think maybe they're just a couple pieces away, but there's a lot more, I think, than a first glance in order to get them competitive. So yeah, it's a rewarding save if you can get past those first couple of years and get the money to really compete in once again a division that should be pretty wide open in a couple of years, but it's rough going at first. So pure middle of the road there. All right, Houston. I have them as a C as well. So the farm system's below average, but there are a couple of decent players like Jeremy Pena, but there's not a lot of depth there. It's pretty shallow. Of course, the lineup is great. You've got a mix of young players like Tucker. You've got players in your prime. I would normally put them as a B, but the best case scenario is you win a piece of metal with them. So you get a C. Kansas City. So I have them as a D as well. The only thing saving them from an F are Bobby Witt Jr. and MJ Melendez. They're two top prospects who are both really highly rated in OOTP. They have a bottom third budget. The farm system isn't that great once you get past the two of them, and everything else is pretty tough. Small market, you know, it's Kansas City, right? You know what you're getting into there. It's pretty rough. The Angels. So I'm going to give them an A for Anaheim. They're a classic OOTP favorite. They have Mike Trout and Fishman Good. They have the second coming of Babe Ruth, of course. And he's finally as good, or he looks like he may be as good in OOTP as he is in real life, whereas the last couple of seasons he was just bad in OOTP, on both as a pitcher and a hitter. The rest of the team, like real life, it's all right. You've got, you know, some talent, you know, throughout the lineup. The pitching staff definitely needs some help, but when hasn't that been the case with the Angels? The contracts aren't too bad. Really, only Rendon's contract is kind of scary. The rest are pretty manageable in comparison. The farm system's terrible, but you've got Ohtani and Trout, so that has to be one of the most fun saves you can play. So they're getting an A. The Dodgers also getting an A. I mean, I don't think this needs too much explanation. Top-end talent. They have lots of depth. They have an amazing farm system with, you know, star quality players as well as lots of depth. You get a lot of opportunity for talent change randomness to help out. Yeah, they have the biggest budget in the game, biggest payroll. There's really nothing negative about the Dodgers. The only reason, you know, they're probably going to be one of the easiest saves to start with. So if you're looking for a challenge, definitely don't go for that. But, I mean, if you're starting out and you just want to win and figure out the game that way, the Dodgers are the perfect choice. Yeah. Miami goes as a D for me. Being Miami, they, of course, have a very low budget. It's always going to be one of the most difficult saves because of that. Very low fan interest to start with. You really have to try very, very hard to get the finances even remotely competitive. However, they do have a good young starting staff. The lineup could use some work. The farm system has some talent in it for sure. But it's, when you're playing with Miami, you're always playing in hard mode. So 2 thumbs up if you're a masochist. Go with Miami. They're an excellent choice. But otherwise, it's a tough save. So just be prepared if you go with it. Next up is Milwaukee, and I actually have them as a C, which really surprised me because I thought they were going to be a D or an F. But looking at the ratings in game, they've got like just enough to pull you in and make it fun. The starting pitching, of course, is top tier. They've got some good players and actually have, like, if you keep team chemistry on, they actually have like a lot of leadership when you start, which is really nice and helping build that team cohesion, and generally just makes your players overperform if you've got a good team atmosphere like that. They have enough talent in the lineup, which once again, I don't, like some teams like we'll look at later, feel like got unfairly penalized across the board. Milwaukee, I think, could have been one of those, but they aren't. Fortunate for them. So they've got like a squad that could actually win now, while you try and retool the farm system on the fly. So if you want to balance that out of trying to win now, but also trying to build up a very barren farm system, it could be really fun. And you're in the NL Central, so you've got a chance. So next up, Minnesota. So I have them as a B. They have lots of depth in the farm system, classic Twins, right? They have a team with lots of contact hitters, which I love. No long-term commitments contract-wise other than Byron Buxton. Some great defense up the middle with Buxton and Correa. They're a really good, I would say, intermediate save where it's not going to be as difficult as, like in Arizona or Colorado where you're really rebuilding. But you do need to, do a little bit of work in trying to win now and you've got the basis and the farm system, good player development, all of that. So it's really, I would say, a good choice for someone who's maybe played like a couple seasons and is looking for a different sort of challenge. So I think they were one that I think really surprised me that way. And like I expected them to be decent, but I didn't expect them to be that much fun to play. Next up, we've got the New York Mets. I have them as a B. Of course, they have VC money, so they've got a big budget now, some star power. They've got a great storyline opportunity where, not the in-game storylines, but just you've got a chance to try and overtake the Yankees for popularity in the city, and just win more, which when you're spending that much more than everybody else and starting to spend more than the Yankees, it could happen. I think they're probably the second best win now save behind the Dodgers. The farm system could use some reinforcements, but you've got hedge fund money, so you can do a lot of contract, taking on contracts, getting prospects in return, all that fun stuff, because the luxury tax is a made-up number for them. So, or at least that's the hope, right? I think they would be a really fun save in that regard. Meanwhile, across town, the Yankees, I think they're actually a C. Of course, they've got some talent. They've got some stars. But they've got a lot of money tied up. They've got a lot of long, expensive contracts, a lot of injury history. Their whole team's a little fragile, really. The minor leagues, I don't think are that good. I think they're rated below average in all the farm system rankings in game. They're good if you want, a quality squad. You don't have to rebuild right away. But, I could think of a lot more fun saves that get you basically the same experience. So they're just very, very average from a fun perspective for me. So C for the Yankees. Next up, Oakland. I have them as a D, and initially I had them as an F. The reason being, the best thing I can say is that they've got a lot of catching depth. Everything else it's a little iffy. They do have defense up the middle with two prospects in Nick Allen and Christian Pache. That plus their catcher depth means you've got like a solid spine up the middle, but everything else is just rough. It's Oakland. They're not in a good place. If you follow baseball at all, the stadium situation, everything. It's just not a good time for them as a franchise. Honestly, the only way I would pick the A's to start a save is if I were going to, force a move in game, like either build them a stadium or relocate them to another city. That's the only way I'd personally find that save fun. Next up, the Phillies. I have them as a C. They're really interesting in OOTP because they're a really talented squad, and they've got big budget. They've got, you've got a really good lineup, but it's win now. The entire core is like 28 to 31. Wheeler, Harper, even, like new signings like Castellanos, like they're very win now. And just like in real life, their defense sucks. And so you have to figure out, how do you get all of these like corner bats in the lineup while not just hemorrhaging runs defensively. And that, that's what's plagued them the last couple of years in real life too. So they're an interesting save that way. Like I said, very win now. It's a competitive division, so it could be fun that way. Like if you were just going to play a save for a couple years, this could be a fun one. But yeah, if you're after that, you're going to have to start retooling and rebuilding, or hopefully rebuilding on the fly. Next up is Pittsburgh. I have them as a D. I don't think that should be that surprising. They've got a few quality hitters at the major league level, like Brian Hayes, Brian Reynolds, but you're probably going to end up trading them pretty quickly because that's how you have to operate as Pittsburgh, because you got to get more talent in soon, and you're not going to pay top dollar free agency. The farm system's pretty good, though. That is a positive. So you've got minor league talent that can help with the rebuild. They do have the lowest budget in the game. So if you're a masochist, Pittsburgh's another awesome choice. Otherwise, I would not recommend that, especially if you're first starting out. Next up, San Diego. They're an A. They're really deep. They're really well-rounded. They get better as the season goes on, as like the injuries to Tatis and Clevenger heal up. So you basically get deadline reinforcements without having to give up talent. They're still a top quality farm system in the game. They've still got depth. Tatis is a cheat code, as long as you don't get into any weird injury storylines in game, because you don't want that to mimic real life. But otherwise, great save, a lot of fun. Next up, San Francisco. And I actually have them as a D as well. And this actually surprised me because they're one of the teams, and probably the team I think that got hit hardest by OOTP. Like if you look at the projection systems, including the ones that OOTP licenses to help with the player ratings, they have San Francisco as better than what at least it appears that the San Francisco players are. Like they just seem a little nerfed across the board. And I don't understand why. I mean, they won 100 and some games last year, and it was, it wasn't a fluke. Their run differential said they were that good. Like it doesn't make a ton of sense to me. I think they did get a little unfairly hit in OOTP. The farm system has some like good depth. There's a couple players who I saw in there that looked really promising, but it's like honestly, it's just a little disappointing that I feel like they should be better in game, and I don't know what happened to make that not the case. And the team's a little bit older, so you're going to see the decline hit pretty quickly with them. So you're starting off worse than I think they should be, and then they're just going to get worse quicker. So, yeah, not a save I would really recommend, unfortunately. Seattle, they are an easy A for me. They've got great youth. They have the best minor league system in the game according to the top prospects in game. They have a solid core to build around that way. They don't have any long contracts that you really want to dump. They've got a middling budget right now, but it's very possible that in game start winning a little bit. That'll ramp up and you'll have, a top third budget. I mean, it's been the case that way for Seattle in the past, so it wouldn't be surprising. So you've got some restrictions early on, but you can work with that as you're building the team and, graduating those prospects and helping them develop. So one I'd highly recommend. Next up, St. Louis. I have St. Louis at a C. The lineup's very formidable. They've got a lot of hitting talent. But you've also got that triple retirement tour with Wainwright, Pujols, and Yadier Molina. So that's sort of an interesting wrinkle in there. The pitching needs some help beyond Flaherty. You've really got a bunch of fringe average guys who you're basically hoping they get ground balls and you get lucky defensively. Farm system's rated pretty average, so there's some reinforcements that can help, but I don't think there's a lot of top talent in there. So, not the one I'd recommend most, but once again, you in CNL Central, you could very conceivably compete in there. And even if you have 80 something wins with the Cardinals history, wouldn't be shocking if you won a trophy that way. Tampa Bay is an A for two reasons. Number one, Wander. Number two, Franco. You just get the best prospect in the game at shortstop for the next 10 years on a very reasonable contract. And he's going to, with his ratings in game and with any any progression in his ratings, he's probably going to get 2,500 or 3,000 hits. He's that good in game. So you can't go wrong with just that. And then you've got the rest of the team. It's very balanced. There's some good youth. They've got some pitching prospects who are, of course, going to win awards and then get traded away in 5 years. The game rates them as the 8th best minor league system at the start. You've got the bottom 5 budget because they're Tampa Bay, but that does increase the challenge, and especially when you've got that much young talent, it keeps it very interesting. So you're constantly rotating your talent and trying to prolong that competitive window. So yeah, it's an A. And once again, did I mention that you get to manage Wander Franco? So highly recommend it. Texas, my favorite team growing up. I think they're a D in OOTP because I think OOTP gets it right in that their current talent level is that they're a year away from being a year away. Like they really shouldn't be, competing just yet. And the problem with that in OOTP is you've got some very long, expensive contracts, and OOTP is just not very kind aging wise. I mean, especially if you don't end up changing any of the aging settings, or like we talked about in the previous video. If you don't do that, then you're gonna have a very rough time in about 4 or 5 years when Seager and Simeon and all are declining, and you've got a third or more of your budget tied up in bench players, and just backup middle infielders, really. So it's going to be tough. You do have some good prospects, Josh Jung, Jack Leiter. The rest are very speculative, which is also a very Rangers thing. But yeah, those 2 major contracts are like destined to become albatrosses in OOTP. So yeah, I think they're a D this year. Next up, Toronto. They are an A. You get Vlad Jr. Bo Bichette, I think, has 80 grade potential in the game, which is, not that surprising, but just a little. The lineup is awesome. The bullpen's pretty weak, but you've got a good starting staff. You can work with that. And the bullpen, that's the easiest thing to upgrade in OOTP, especially once you get a little bit further in the season and you get the top tier closers and setup guys put on the training block. You can make some trades that way, especially if you've got some budget, and Toronto does. The minor league system's pretty average, but they do have a potential monster with Gabriel Moreno. So still some reinforcements to come, and really help out there. And then finally, the Nationals. I have them as a B. You get Juan Soto. Once again, that's just an amazing, ridiculous start. And his ratings are some of the most ridiculous that I've seen in game in years. Like he does it all, which is realistic. It's generally OTP is a little bit more reserved in some of the top end talent where you don't see, crazy, 80s across the board. But Juan Soto is about as close to that as you will get in OTP. You've got a few other interesting young players. You're going to be rebuilding, which, they definitely help speed up the process, give you like a solid base. But there's not a lot of depth in the farm system. They're definitely in the thick of it rebuild wise. Some veterans who could be flipped for prospects by the trade deadline, though. So I would say it's a pretty fun one, especially with Soto, because you just get to watch him, although you get the fun of trying to negotiate with Scott Boras in the next couple of years, so probably knocks it down a peg. But I would recommend these as the probably these 6 up here would probably be the best if you're just starting out. I would say, any of them, you're going to get off to a great start. If you go down here, you definitely need to be prepared for some suffering. But once again, if that's your thing, you'll really enjoy it. So yeah, definitely some more difficulty there. But yeah, I would say, let me know what you guys think in the comments. If there's any changes you would make to this, if you've had good experiences with Arizona or terrible ones with the Rays or anything in between, let me know. And yeah, enjoy your next sim.